It wasn't until seeing this moment in the miniseries that I then realized what a huge mistake that was in the book. Hello, thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am once again talking about It by Stephen King. So I recently did a book versus movie video where I compared the book with the 2017 and 2019 movies, and in that video I go much more in depth into the plot, into the themes, into all of the details. So if you have not yet watched that video, you definitely should. Today's video though is going to be more laid back and just me sharing my thoughts on the 1990 miniseries adaptation, which was directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. And I'm also getting into spoilers right away. And with this miniseries, I will just say right away that I really liked it and I would highly recommend it. There are certain things about it where it just screams 1990 made-for-TV production, and yet that's kind of the charm in some ways. And I thought they did a great job at capturing the spirit of the book and staying true to the characters, and we get some great moments with each of them. And I also liked the section with the kids just as much as the second section, which focuses more on the adults, although I will say that the miniseries in general, it, jumps back and forth with the timelines more similar to the way the book did. However, it is clearly divided into two parts, and part one ends with the kids, quote unquote, defeating it, similar to the new movies, how they did that. And to talk about the cast, so Tim Curry plays Pennywise, and he, of course, is fantastic. And there are a few moments with him that I will talk about more in detail later in the video. But I still really like Bill Skarsgård. I still think he is excellent as Pennywise. But I saw this Letterboxd review that basically sums up the difference between the two portrayals. So they say, I'd rather wake up to 2017 Pennywise next to me than the 1990 Pennywise. I feel like the 1990s Pennywise would try and do some freaky shit to me, not gonna lie. And the 2017 one would just kill me. So the 2017 one, he is much scarier, and there are visuals that are, so terrifying, honestly. Like maybe that makes me sound like a weakling, but there are still certain images from the new movies that I will wake up thinking about because they were just so scary. Whereas the 1990 one, there's nothing here that is like as scary visually, and yet, his performance is still very unsettling and weird and disturbing in its own way, while also being kind of funny and very amusing. And he brought so much to the character of Pennywise. Also, the makeup he wears must have been very irritating for his eyes, because certain scenes, his eyes are so red. So I felt bad for Tim Curry, but it adds to the overall effect. And then we have John Boy playing the adult Bill, which any fans of the Waltons, anyone who watched that show growing up, I have not watched it in ages, but I definitely remember that this guy played John Boy, the main son in the Waltons family. And I had actually seen this miniseries before, by the way, but I only remembered three things. One, that John Boy was in the lead role of Bill. And I think one of the reasons this has stuck with me is because going from the Waltons to this feels so different. Like it's out of character for John Boy to be in a horror thing. And so I've always remembered that he was in this. And then I also remembered that Pennywise turns into a spider in the end. And then I also remembered the scene with Stan's head in the fridge in the library. And that has stuck with me because I have a particular aversion to severed heads. So when they are in a movie, it gets stuck in my brain because I find it something about it. It's very effective in being disturbing and gross for me. But I have to talk about Bill's ponytail, which looked so ugly and terrible. I don't know who made that choice, but I hated it. And then his wife is played by the great Olivia Hussey, who actually recently died, so rest in peace, Olivia Hussey. And then young Bill is played by Jonathan Brandis, and I read afterwards that he committed suicide at age 27, which was 2003, and he struggled with alcohol, so that in part contributed to his mental health. But so that was really sad to read. And I thought he was great in the role as young Bill. And speaking of death, John Ritter plays adult Ben Hanscom, and I thought he was fantastic in the role, but I will forever remember when he died, because he also died in 2003 of something with his heart. But he died on the anniversary of September 11th, and Johnny Cash also died that same day or around the same time. And so growing up, this was a huge deal on the news. It was a huge deal with my parents. And so the death of John Ritter and Johnny Cash, that moment in time is forever in my brain. And speaking of Ben Hanscom too, the young Ben Hanscom, who I thought was great, he has a cameo in It Chapter 2. He plays a guy who works for the 2019's Ben Hanscom. But yeah, I thought that was so cool that he got to have that small little cameo. And then Seth Green plays young Richie Tozier. And honestly, Seth Green, I'm not a fan of him. Something about him, I just always find him annoying in basically everything he's in. But I did think he was fine as a young Richie. Although, fun fact, he has red hair, so here Richie is a redhead, whereas in the book, Bill had red hair, but here in the miniseries, Bill is blonde. Also, Bev has red hair in the book, and her red hair, like Bill is a redhead too, and yet Bev, her red hair feels more integral to her character, and we also have the poem, Your Hair is Winter Fire, and we get the poem in the miniseries as well, but Bev is a brunette, and so I was a little disappointed. I would rather see her natural hair than see this actor in a bad wig. So, it doesn't ruin anything for me by any means, and usually little details like this I'm not a stickler for, and I'm fine with these changes being done. For example, adult Ben is also bald in the book. But yeah, changes to appearance generally don't bother me unless it feels like something about their appearance was so important to who they were. And Bev's red hair, it's not a critical part of who she is, and yet it was important enough that I was a little disappointed that she wasn't a redhead. But now to share my thoughts on the first section, which focuses primarily on the children. So first of all, I was surprised that they did not start the miniseries with the death of Georgie. Instead, we begin with Mike as an adult in Derry learning about the murder of another kid, and then we see him call Bill, and then Bill has a flashback to what happened to Georgie, which of course is an iconic moment. And by iconic, I mean obviously it's horrible, but I think both movies just did a great job with this scene with Pennywise in the gutter. Yeah, everybody, even if you know nothing else, everybody knows about, the clown in the gutter with the sailboat. It's just so iconic. And like the book, in the miniseries, they have Georgie's body, so they know he is dead. Whereas, in the new movie, it's this whole thing where they don't have his body, and so Bill is hoping there's, still a chance. But that was not from the book. And then as in the book, each kid has their separate experiences with Pennywise. With Richie here, he sees the werewolf in the school basement by himself. But in the book, the first time he saw the werewolf was in the house on Nebel Street when he was with Bill. And again, it's this whole thing where he's in denial about what his first experience with Pennywise is. But yeah, here they don't have that, and they have him see it in the school basement as a werewolf. And by the way, the miniseries does not have the house on Nebel Street, which kind of surprised me because it was such a big part of the story. But I understand why they needed to just simplify the story and focus just on the sewers instead. And then Bev, of course, has the blood coming from the sink, and her dad who doesn't see it at all. And here she cleans up the blood only for it to instantly reappear. And then she later has the boys come over and they confirm that they see it and they help her clean it. And yeah, them coming to help Bev clean up the blood in just all versions. This is one of my favorite scenes, and I just really love it. And I do think it's interesting that in the miniseries, she tries to clean it up on her own, but she isn't successful until she reaches out and gets the help of others. So I feel like you could break that down and get meaning out of that, right? She needed to reach out and get the support of others in order to finally get rid of this blood. You could see deeper symbolism, but also maybe just fighting against Pennywise, it needs to be a group effort. Speaking of a group effort, I did think this movie did a good job at capturing the friendship the 7 kids have, and I thought they all had great chemistry. And I also love how this captures how all 7 kids knew that something special had happened once Mike joined the group, and they all felt that feeling wow, we are now complete. And the show captures this in part by having Mike take a photo of all of them right away. Once they defeat Henry Bowers in the rock fight, he's they call themselves the Lucky 7, and then he's hey, let's take a picture together. Which if you think about it, that would seem kind of weird. It's literally the first time they're talking to him, and he's let's take a photo. But in the context of this story, they all feel how monumentous this moment is, and that something has clicked into place. And so, yeah, I loved that the first time they are all together, they take a photo because they feel that this is important. By the way, I love the apocalyptic rock fight in all versions too. I think that's a great moment. And also in the book, it's called the apocalyptic rock fight. And I just love that name. And just that phrase will get stuck in my head sometimes. Like you get songs stuck in your head, but sometimes do you ever just get a word or a phrase stuck in your head? Because I do. And the apocalyptic rock fight will sometimes just get stuck in my head for some reason. But then I also thought the scene when Bill is crying, asking them to help him kill it since it has killed Georgie, was really sweet and sad. And I felt even more emotionally connected to young Bill here than I had in the new movie. And I also like the part, which is from the book, when he is looking at Georgie's photo album and Georgie's face moves and then the photo album bleeds. And then the miniseries adds the detail where his parents come in and they're picking up the photo album and touching it and getting blood on their hands, but not seeing it. And along those lines, the show does a great job at highlighting how the adults in Derry are not only unaware of what is happening, but it's more just that they want to ignore what is happening and they would rather stick their head in the sand, right? Because you have instances with Bev's dad or Bill's parents where they literally don't see what's right there. But then you have other instances like when Mike, he is into history. So we have a scene where he is sharing, dark parts of Derry's history. And the teacher is less than enthusiastic about him bringing this up. And so you can just see how the adults in Derry would rather ignore it and pretend like none of this ever happened and not address it. And then in the book, so they go to the house on Neibolt Street and Bev has the silver slugs with the slingshot and they have a confrontation with it and she does hit it with one of the slugs, which does injure it. And then they leave and then they return later to the sewers and that's when they have another showdown yet again. And this is when they actually get rid of it temporarily. Whereas in the movie, when they go with the slugs, this is the finale, which again, it makes sense to have things more concise and just combine these two events into the showdown. And we also have Eddie spraying it with his inhaler. And the actor who played Eddie was so cute. I absolutely loved him. And the way Pennywise looks after he has sprayed it with this, quote unquote acid from his inhaler was actually pretty creepy. And then Bev shoots it and this makes like a crack in its head where light comes out of, which was kind of cool. And then from here it goes down the drain and they try to grab it, but it changes its hand into the hand of like some, maybe not an insect, but like some weird creature. So then they let go and it goes down the drain. And then from here, they're like, I think we got rid of it, right? But they're not quite sure. And so they make a pact to return to Derry if it ever returns. And in the movie, Bill is the one who has them do this pact, whereas in the book it was Stan. And then the 2017 movie also has it be Bill. But yeah, in the book, Stan was the one who initiated this. But yeah, with Pennywise, so I liked the scene with Georgie. I also liked the scene, the showdown, the finale, and the way it looks after it gets the acid, as well as the way it changes its hand. I thought that was some pretty cool effects. And then I also liked the shower scene with Eddie. Both like the way he opens up the floor was a really cool practical effect. But then also like the extending shower heads, something about that felt very 80s horror in my mind. And yeah, I really like the shower scene. And then I did also like the scene which came from the book when they're looking at Mike's photo album and the picture starts to move and then Pennywise tries to come out of the picture. In the book, there was like the protective covering that blocked him from coming out. But yeah, in the miniseries, his hand comes out before they shut it. So I thought that was cool. It wasn't quite as impressive or scary as that slide projector scene in the new movie. That scene was so incredible in the 2017 movie. But yeah, this one here in the miniseries I still liked. And then to move on to the adult section of the story. So once again, I thought all of the actors had great chemistry with each other. And in the movie, we get like a Butch Cassidy-esque scene when Mike and Bill are riding Silver, which is Bill's bicycle, which was pretty funny. And also the fact that they only had 3 hours to tell this 1,100-page story. And yet they were willing to devote 3 to 5 minutes to this bicycle scene. Like that's definitely a choice. But it worked and I really liked it. I really liked the scene in Butch Cassidy too. But it's also funny because when Mike and Bill meet up, they're walking in town and Bill is like, oh, I remember this part of town. Bev lived here. Like this is Poor Town. And Mike is like, yeah, like this is Poor Town. And then he walks right up to his house, which is right there. So that was also a funny moment. But then Mike, he already has Silver at his house and then they proceed to ride it around and have fun. Whereas, yeah, in the book, Bill found it at a pawn shop. And I think one of the reasons the bike scene works for me is because, like I said, if you watched my previous video, in It Chapter 2, they had so much humor and it was too much and it oftentimes just did not work for me. And it's like they didn't want to take what they were doing seriously. And so the miniseries, actually, they're not scared to be earnest and sincere and take this seriously, even if it is like on the surface kind of a ridiculous story, right? Like about this cosmic clown. But, the book, it does have a lot of serious, earnest, sincere, genuine moments. And that's one of the things that makes it work, is because it is heartfelt. And so I felt like the miniseries was also very heartfelt. And so moments like this, it didn't feel like ridiculous, like this ridiculous comedic moment. Instead, it just felt like a fun moment of levity where we see these two guys reconnecting. And yeah, it just worked for me. But here, when they show up, they all go around town and each has an experience with Pennywise before meeting at the Chinese restaurant that night. But in both book and movie, Bev, she goes, and this was also in the new movie as well, but she goes to her old apartment building and there's an old woman there that lets her in. And so she's talking to this old lady. However, it turns out this old lady ends up being Pennywise. And I thought the scene in the miniseries was so good. Like the way the lady is gobble drinking her tea was so weird, and then her gross teeth, and then the tea turning into blood, and then the old woman turns into this weird, it almost looked like her dad, so a mix of her dad and this old woman, and it just looked so creepy and weird. And yeah, I thought the scene was fantastic. I did really like it in the 2019 movie as well. But they kind of ruined it because eventually the old woman comes out and she's just totally CGI and looks really weird, and it didn't work. And so the scene was great up until that final moment. And then I also liked in the miniseries when Pennywise shows up to Bill when Bill is at Georgie's grave. And Pennywise has set up 7 graves, one of which is already filled because Stan has died. And by the way, both adaptations, they don't have the suspense of the book intro where we hear about Stan's death very early on. And starting with his death and him writing it in blood was such a great way to kick things off, along with hearing about Georgie, of course. And so I wish there was a version out there that began with his suicide, because it's so dark and ominous and it sets the tone for what you're in for while also filling you with so much mystery and suspense. And then in the book, Ben goes to the library and he sees Pennywise there, whereas here it is Richie who goes to the library. And by the way, in the book, it makes sense that Ben is the one who goes to the library because as a kid, the library was his sanctuary in many ways. And I loved the way Stephen King wrote about this, because when I was a kid, I loved the library. And so the way he writes about the wonder that the library holds for Ben, I just loved it. And the way Ben has nostalgia for the library when he goes back. And yeah, those summer reading programs were just so much fun. And fun fact, the first time I ever did a book versus movie was for a library summer reading program, where for fun, they wanted you to read the book and then watch the movie. And then you wrote a short paragraph on it. And I did Where the Red Fern Grows. And I had so much fun writing that. That was when I was 9 years old. And yeah, that memory has always stuck with me. And look at me now, talking about books and movies. And then the Chinese restaurant scene I liked a lot as well. Again, seeing them bond, but also when they open up their fortune cookies. I liked it better here than in the new movie, because the new movie, I liked how weird and trippy it was, but then it just went way over the top and kind of ruined it. Also, in the miniseries, when Bev shows up, she faints, which was a bit unnecessary, but I'll give it a pass. Also, Bev, at different moments, she kisses 3 different men on the lips. I think at least 3 of them, which I'm just why is she, with Ben, it makes sense, but there's 2 other guys that she kisses on the lips. And she does it just in a hello way, but who does that? Was that their subtle reference to the fact that Bev had sex with all of them in the book? I don't know. But in the new movie, at one point, they all want to leave Derry when the full realization of what they're in for hits them. However, none of them actually do leave. And here, they make the distinction that Stan, the reason why he has a more full memory and ends up killing himself instead, Here they say that it's because he was like the only one who saw the deadlights, and he had confided in one of them being like, I saw the deadlights and I wanted to be there. And then also we hear about his interaction with it when he protects himself by like saying the names of birds when he's a kid. And this was in the book as well. But in the miniseries, after Stan is dead, Bill is telling the others this story that Stan had told him when they were kids. So it was kind of weird the way it was presented to us in that way, but it worked. But at one point near the end, all of them are at the Dairy Inn, and 3 of them go upstairs for one reason or another. And this is when Mike is attacked by Henry Bowers, who is then killed. And then Mike goes into the hospital and is out of commission for the sewer scene, which is how it was in the book. And Ben also goes upstairs, and Bev shows up, and she shuts the door behind her, and she says the first part of the poem to him, which he then finishes. And she's like, I knew it was you. Like, I want to be with you. I can't wait any longer. And so then she kisses him and it's like a very hungry kiss. And so he's making out with her when then we get a reference to The Shining, because he looks in the mirror and he sees that it is actually Pennywise he is kissing. And so then he pulls away and Pennywise is like, kiss me, fat boy. And this scene was just so fantastic. I absolutely loved it. And even as soon as Bev showed up and she shuts the door, I was guessing that she was Pennywise. And yet even with me already kind of seeing that come, it was still fantastic. And I loved this moment. And then the next morning, Bev is talking to Ben and she is confiding in him about the fact that her boyfriend, Tom, because in the miniseries they do not get married, it's just her boyfriend. But she confides to Ben that she is with someone who treats her the way her father treated her. And so she's saying like, how could I have done this? Like how illogical, how sick, basically. And she asks how she could have been so blind to get with someone who abused her in this way. But he says to her, if you're seeing it now, it means you aren't blind anymore. And then as he is comforting her, she realizes that he wrote the poem. And so she quotes it to him. But this is what Pennywise had done just the previous night. And so as soon as she does this, he pulls away. And he's freaking out, being like, who are you right now? Are you Bev? Are you Pennywise? What's going on? And she convinces him like, no, like it's me. It's really me. And so then they kiss and, it's not the hungry kiss from when she was Pennywise. It's like a very sweet kiss. And yeah, I just loved this moment between them so much. And like combined with what we saw the night before with Pennywise and then seeing Ben like freak out and having her to convince him it's her. And then, everything about this, I just absolutely loved. And in the book, she opens up about her relationship with Tom, but it is with Bill. So she and Bill are having this vulnerable moment, and then the two of them end up having sex, which when I read the book initially, I was like, whatever, this was fine. I didn't have a problem with it. Yes, they're both cheating on their spouse, but I don't know, given the circumstances, this is they're in a supernatural, insane experience where they're suddenly getting all of these memories back and it feels like they're in a different world, basically. And so anyway, basically, when I read this part in the book, I thought it was fine, even though they don't actually stay together, because in the end, she gets with Ben and he stays with Audra. It wasn't until seeing this moment in the miniseries that I then realized what a huge mistake that was in the book to have her confide in Bill, even though ultimately she is going to end up with Ben. So yeah, I feel like that was a huge mistake on King's part. Bill is the author insert, and so it makes sense he had Bill get all of these moments. But yeah, it totally should have been between her and Ben because it was so romantic in the movie. And yeah, I just absolutely loved it. It just fills my heart just thinking about it, as cheesy as that sounds. I love the two of them in the miniseries. And also in the end, we hear that they are expecting a baby. This is a big part of the book, is the fact that as adults, none of them have any kids. And so I think, if you relate this to childhood trauma, it's probably because they have this dark past that they don't even fully remember that is haunting them, preventing them from having kids because they don't want to pass on that trauma. But now that they have faced it and have conquered their childhood traumas, now they don't need to worry about passing on generational trauma onto their children. And so now they are finally ready to raise kids of their own. And so, yeah, so I love that. We also hear that they're going to have a baby. And speaking of beautiful moments, I also liked when they were all getting ready to go back home and abandon their mission to face it, when Bill then sees a vision of his mom playing the piano with Georgie, the same song she was playing the day he went out with the boat. And he then comes out and he tells them how he gets paid to scare people because he is a horror writer. But he says how he is the one who has been scared and how he needs to face that fear, face it, and this time kill it. And it cuts back to when he was a boy asking them to help him. And I thought this was such a fantastic moment. And again, I felt so much more emotionally connected to Bill in this miniseries than I did in the movies. And it's interesting because the movies have a similar scene where he's telling them, asking for their help. And yet it just didn't have the same power and the same emotion that the miniseries did. Again, I think the miniseries really leaned in to being more earnest and sincere. Whereas again, especially in It Chapter 2, it felt like it was never letting itself take itself too seriously. And I feel like that was to its detriment. Because I could see some people maybe saying that this is cheesy or sappy in the miniseries, but I think it works and it was very effective. And yeah, I felt very connected to Bill and all of the characters. But here in the miniseries, as in the book, Pennywise becomes a weird spider thing. But here, Richie, Bill, and Ben get caught in the deadlights. However, we do not see what is happening with them, when they're in this trance like we do in the book. But like in the book, Eddie then attacks it, but then it kills Eddie. And then in the miniseries, all of them that are remaining then go after and they all take out its heart together and kill it. Which again, I love that it was a group effort because in the book, it was just Bill taking the heart out. By the way, Eddie in this version does not get married, and he still lives with his mom, even as an adult, and he tells them before entering its lair that he is a virgin still, and then he ends up dying. And this kind of made me think of like a virgin sacrifice, right? Which was done to appease the gods. So it's like, was Eddie almost like their virgin sacrifice in a sense? But I also wanted to say that before he gets it with its inhaler, which helps save Ben, Bill, and Richie, he says an abbreviated version of that line that Bill says in the book about how he believes in Santa and the Tooth Fairy and believes in the good of people, essentially. And he says that before he sprays it. And I love that part in the book. I quoted it in my last video. And so I love that they had an abridged version of it here in the miniseries. But apparently John Ritter was a huge Stephen King fan. And so when he was talking to the director, at one point he asked him about including the turtle. And apparently the director looked at him being like, are you crazy? Like, there's no way we're including the turtle. Like, that's not going to translate. That's way too weird and out there. But of course, the cosmic turtle, that is why I am wearing this shirt right here. But yeah, I love that John Ritter himself was a fan. But I also love that the director was like, are you crazy? Like, that got way too weird. We can't show that on screen. That's not going to work. But I'm kind of sad that neither adaptation has really gone for it, especially the new movies. That was their opportunity with, better special effects. Like, they could have shown the Macroverse. Like, yeah, it would have been weird and really sci-fi, but I wish there was a version that showed it, as weird as it is. But also in the book, you have the presence of the turtle, but also you have the presence of the other, who is even greater than the turtle, that is helping them along. And in the mini series, we get moments, like specifically with Mike, where he is saying, like, remember when we were kids and there was something that was helping us. So while yes, there is the evil of it that is working against us, we have the goodness of this other force that is helping us. And so I like that the mini series references this other force guiding them along. But then to talk about Audra and kind of Tom, because like I said, Tom here, they are just boyfriend, girlfriend, not married. And Tom does not chase Beverly down to Derry. He just disappears from the story. Whereas Audra, like the book, she does leave England and fly to Derry. However, she is kidnapped by Pennywise and she looks at the deadlights, which puts her in a catatonic state. And so even after they kill it, she is still just not there. And so like in the book, Bill takes her on a ride on Silver and this awakens her. And I think this worked much better in the book though, because in the movie, he is literally on the verge of getting them both killed and that is what wakes her up. Like he was reckless in the book, but here, like they're literally not wearing helmets and literally like riding right into traffic. And so they almost got killed by it barely survived, and now he is putting their lives at risk by almost getting hit by a car as they're precariously riding this bike without helmets right into traffic. It was a bit too ridiculous. But yeah, I think this concept worked much better in the book, and just understanding why he was doing this, right? To connect to their inner child. And in the book, it awakens her because it's so exciting and it's so exhilarating. Whereas in the show, it seems like it awakens her because she's like, are you trying to get us killed right now? And that's what wakes her up. But yeah, to wrap up this video, my final thoughts, I really enjoyed this and I would highly recommend it. And I could definitely see myself watching this again. And as far as how I would rank these, so chapter 2 is at the bottom. I would give that 3.5 stars. And then I think It from 2017 and the miniseries are tied with 4 stars. Although, as I've been talking about the miniseries, I almost want to give it an even higher rating, like maybe 4.5. But I guess for now, I'll stick with 4 stars, so it would be tied with the 2017 movie. And then number 1 would be the book. So the book still wins over them all. And with the book, so I'm inclined to give it 4.5 stars because of 2 things. Bev in the sewers, having sex with them in the sewers, of course, needs to be taken out of the book. But then also, I think it was a huge missed opportunity not to have Bev connect with Ben. Like, they're the ones who should have had this special moment. Seeing it in the miniseries again made me realize what a mistake it was, because it was so fantastic. And so having her instead connect with Bill and having the two have sex, cheating on their partners, which Tom, screw him, whatever. But Audra was fantastic. And so, you have Bill cheating on Audra. And so it's, that's not a romantic scene between he and Bev. And so, yeah, anyway, basically, I wish Bev and Ben got more time together so we could really get the romance, And so because of those 2 things, I want to give it a 4.5. And yet, at the end of the day, even though there's things I would change about it, I almost still want to give it 5 stars because all in all, despite any complaints, it's still just such an incredible book. And the more I talk about it, the more I love it. So I feel like technically it's a 4.5, but emotionally, maybe I would just give it a 5 stars at the end of the day. But yeah, that officially wraps up my coverage for it. I probably won't be making any more videos about it since these are the only adaptations. And I've read the book twice now, so I doubt I'll feel the need to read it for a 3rd time for quite a while. But yeah, I hope you have enjoyed these videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share your thoughts down below. Did you watch this when it aired? I would love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, comment down below what rating you would give the book and all 3 adaptations. Thank you again so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.